Here we go. My name is Lawrence Rosenberg, and this is the Alpha Human Podcast. Our guest today is Brent Gleeson, a Navy SEAL combat veteran, entrepreneur, and the founder of TakingPoint Leadership, a leadership and management consulting firm where Brent speaks and coaches on topics ranging from building high-performance teams and elite cultures through to organizational transformation. He is also an award-winning business leader and was named a top 10 CEO by Entrepreneur magazine. Brent writes weekly columns for Inc.com and Forbes.com, and he's also the best-selling author of Taking Point, a Navy SEAL's 10 fail-safe principles for leading through change, and his new book, which we're going to get into on this episode, Embrace the Suck, the Navy SEAL Way to an Extraordinary Life. Brent, welcome to the show.
Lawrence, thank you so much, brother. It's great to be here with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for doing the podcast. I'll tell you what, I read Embrace the Suck, and it's got me motivated. It's got me inspired. There's definitely some stuff in there that I have taken now into account in my life, there's two major themes that have hit me from the book. We'll get into it as we go. Other people will find different things, I'm sure, in Embrace the Suck. But, there are certainly some things that I've taken away that I'm going to actually apply to my life. So first and foremost, great book. Thanks for writing it.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate it, man.
So let's set the scene with a quote from Embrace the Suck. In early 2007, I made a decision that carried a lifelong impact. I left a relatively lucrative job as a financial analyst with a global real estate development company to join the United States Navy. The objective? To successfully navigate what is arguably the most challenging special operations training and selection program in the world and become a Navy SEAL. Little did I know that the following months and years would change my perception of adversity forever. So, Brent, that's the opposite trajectory many in the teams take. Usually it's first SEALs, first special operations, right? Excel at a high level. Then, you transition out and you become an entrepreneur. You enter the business world and you make your way there. So tell us, it's a fascinating story. Tell us your journey to becoming a Navy SEAL. What inspired you to make such a radical change from the path you were already on?
Sure. It is kind of an interesting story, for a few reasons. As a quick backstory, grew up in Dallas, Texas, did my undergrad education at Southern Methodist University, earned degrees in finance and economics. I spent a little time at Oxford in England. Nobody should be impressed by that. My area of focus was drinking beer, so I don't really remember much of it, but I did come out of it with, some value.
Okay.
And then I graduated and I took a job as a financial analyst with a global firm based out of downtown Dallas. Now, during that time, I had a close friend of mine, a college buddy, who was a year behind me in school. So he was now a senior. Now, he was, in fact, one of these young men who had a more or less lifelong dream, a passion and vision, a call to serve, to graduate, join the Navy, and at least attempt to be accepted into the notorious SEAL training pipeline. Now, based on your comments earlier and comments from the book, we might have branches around the world that would argue whose training is the hardest. But for the context of this story, I thought it was a very admirable path. Now, keep in mind, this was just pre 9/11. So I had graduated from college in 1999, and I was working in corporate America then on into 2000. And so I wished him well, but soon thereafter, he and I started training together. I had played rugby in college and he had been an athlete. And so for me, it was just a way to stay fit, have an accountability partner, and, help a friend prepare for his arduous journey.
Fair enough.
And naturally, we started spending a lot of time together and having a lot of dialogue about the implications of his joining and the program. And, by the grace of God, if he became a SEAL, what that would mean for his life and career as a young man. Obviously, that piqued my interest, so I started reading books about the history of the naval special warfare community and our forefathers in the underwater demolition teams in World War II, and how we essentially cut our teeth as an elite assault force in Vietnam and the conflicts thereafter. And I really became enthralled by the mindset and the mental fortitude, the grit, the focus, the accountability and discipline, not just in the individual, but how the Naval Special Warfare community and the special operations community as a whole creates high performance teams, the culture, the behavior, the rituals, and how they align a group of people behind a shared sense of purpose to achieve a desired result. And better than most organizations in the world, whether they be in combat or in business, it's something that's very difficult to replicate outside of that very unique environment. And long story short, that growing fascination coupled with the somewhat boring nature of my entry-level financial analyst position led to the culmination of a decision to start taking a little bit of calculated risk and live a life of no regret. I probably say that more in hindsight than I did then. And I quit my job, much to my parents' dismay, because I had never talked about being in the military at all. And my buddy with whom I've been training, we moved, we'd already trained for about a year together. And then we moved to a little town called Crested Butte, Colorado, where we trained for an additional 6 months at about 10 to 11,000 feet altitude to get into peak physical condition. And of course, training the body helps train the mind. And then in early 2000, joined the Navy and was on a plane headed out here to sunny San Diego, California. So that was the journey. So long story short, one of my college buddies talked me into it.
That is unbelievable. I mean, I often speak with special operators, SEALs, Delta Force, Green Beret. I mean, you name it.
Yeah.
And
I noticed you had my buddy Dale on the show too. Love that guy.
oh, Dale. Yeah. Wow. Dale, Dale is one of a kind.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love Dale. And, whenever you have these conversations with those that have accomplished what you've accomplished, their story goes back to when they were kids about how they dreamed about being in the military or about an event that took place when they were very young that triggered or caused them to seek this out as a calling. And your story is just absolutely fascinating because you, as you said, go home, tell your parents you're joining the Navy. And it's like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So that's really, so when you were growing up at all, did you ever think about entering the military or any of the elite branches of the military?
Sure, I thought about it. My dad had served as a Marine during Vietnam. Luckily, didn't deploy downrange.
Okay.
But never really talked about it. Never pushed the military or military service on me or my twin brother. And so it wasn't really a topic of conversation. It was my parents were happy that I was going down the path of business and finance, and just happy that I had a job. And it is interesting, and I'm sure we'll get more into this because I have so many friends and teammates, and some of them are with us, and some of them aren't, who did follow a similar path to what you said, where it was a childhood vision that they had for a long time. I now, it's a rather informal program, but I now also mentor young guys into and through the BUDS program and through advanced training teams. And it's a way to continue to serve and to give back. And it's really interesting to see who we have coming in now. And not that it's that different, but it is a bit different that we've been at war for 20 years. It's a different vision than those of us who went in right before 9/11. It was admittedly more of a personal challenge, and yes, a call to serve and give back and serve in the military, but not the same as we have now. We have droves and droves of young men and women lining up out the door to serve in the military, to serve in special operations. And how amazingly admirable is that? Because we are at conflict, we are at war still. And there's a good chance, especially if you're going into one of the branches where you are the tip of the spear, that you're going to see some level of conflict. And I have the utmost respect for our men and women who are serving, and of course their families who serve alongside them. So in the world of special operations, there's a large amount of diversity that people don't realize. They all think of the same persona of special operators, but there's a large amount of diversity in the organization as far as where people came from, their cultural backgrounds, their financial background, their educational background. Some who have never seen the ocean before yet crush you in a 2-mile swim. It's a wonderful social experiment, especially in the early days of training.
Yeah. You know what? Absolutely. The stories that I have read, the people that I've spoken with, as you just described, come from just an incredible matrix tableau of various backgrounds and upbringings, and just completely different cultures. Uh, it really is amazing who ends up making it, because it really is not what you expect for many, who
Mhm.
gets in and who doesn't. And in your
Right.
book, you talk about, I think, one of the m- major ingredients of whether or not you make it in special operations, whether it be the Navy SEALs or any of the other in the special operations forces community. Um, and that is, you talk in this book, one of the big themes for me was resilience. And you say in the book, you say, this is a book about resilience. So what I'd love to maybe kick off with here is uh, what so what is it that inspired you to write Embrace the Suck?
Sure. I want to first say that, my contribution as it relates to the world of special operations, like literally pales in comparison to so many. I literally have, guys and former teammates who put me through training I've been to war with, and they're still serving in the SEAL teams. So I want to just humbly say that as a caveat that, my contribution, really comes from pulling from the leadership and culture principles that we learn in those experiences, in not just the training, but obviously in, combat deployments and things like that, and how we can apply those in and learn from those things in the civilian world or in the business world or just in a personal development standpoint. It's interesting to see how those things apply. I want to make sure I'm answering your question, correctly. Can you restate just the first
Yeah,
part?
absolutely. Because for me, the book is highly inspirational with incredible advice, um, and it's a little bit different, or fairly different, from your first book,
Right. That
and
was intentional.
that was intentional. And so I'm really interested in understanding what was the motivation for you
Sure.
to write this book.
It, the first book, Taking Point, it's more of a business book, and it was by design. It's really the foundation of my company's principles when it comes to organizational transformation, leading change, culture, leadership, those types of things. And essentially, it's more of a writing a thesis on, change management in the modern world,
Mhm.
with some draws from the world of special operations. But then when interacting with the clients that we do, from medium-sized to enterprise Fortune 100 companies all over the world, from a leadership and organizational development standpoint, we all know that you can't enhance the desired outcomes and results of a team without enhancing the rituals, behaviors, values, and actions of the individuals on the team. You can't get better engagement and better outcomes without better leadership. And leadership really is all about personal development. It's about personal transformation and being in a constant state of improvement, being a lifelong learner. And so there's a theme there, obviously, that I have become fascinated with in studying the art of personal development, emotional intelligence, how we can apply continual lessons learned to not just enhancing our own motivation, but more importantly, from a leadership standpoint, how we motivate, inspire, and engage those that we're meant to lead. And that could be in a business setting, could be in the military, it could be in your family. We all have the opportunity to lead in any aspect, whether it's leading ourselves or leading others or through a peer-to-peer type of situation. And so I said, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's an interesting project that's more in the self-help, personal development genre, so to speak. And I was ready to, possibly write another book. And I had never read a book that technically falls in the self-help genre. So I was like, well, maybe I should probably see what's out there and see what I connect with, see what I don't connect with, and see what's popular. The self-help space, self-improvement space is like a multi-billion-dollar organization, from books to podcasts to other types of content, technology. And so I wanted this to be a fun project. I wanted to be serious in a way too. Now, admittedly, going into writing the book, I didn't realize 2020 was going to suck so bad. So selfishly,
Right.
the timing of the book, in all seriousness, worked out well, because I really do want this book to be a source of inspiration, of motivation, and more importantly, of action. And so when I was doing the research for this, I ordered all kinds of books and started reading through all these. And obviously, books that have sold hundreds of thousands of copies or millions of copies or not many copies. There's some common themes around, no offense, but a lot of fluff, a lot of happy talk, and a lot of, believe in yourself kind of content. And then other books that I thought were really cool and counterintuitive and creative. Like, I love Mark Manson's work with his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. His second book, Everything is F'd. I love the subtitle, A Book About Hope. But again, also the way I think, and the way of many of your viewer listeners think, especially with the military background, we think about action, we think about planning, we think about execution. All this is great, but if there's no action plan, there's no way to execute, who cares? It's not going to really impact me, my life, or my team, or my family. So I thought, well, maybe we can take some learning. Maybe we can apply some of the special operations philosophies to it, of course. But more importantly, let's make sure that there's actionable content in there. That's why I put a mental model in each chapter. So it was really inspired by a lot of the work we do in the company with developing leaders and people. And then the more research I did, I got excited about the possibility of more of a personal transformation book. And then interestingly, based on the timing, like I said before, during my second pass and final pass edits, I actually had the opportunity last year to go back and make some loose references to the pandemic and to our current situation, because the content, of course, is meant to be timeless, but we are in historical times that we're going to be talking about and feeling the ripple effects of for many, many years to come. So I didn't think that was inappropriate to make some references to, a global pandemic, hypothetically speaking, or, some of the social and political unrest and financial and economic uncertainty. So it kind of came together nicely, and we've been very blessed. We've done phenomenal reviews, and so far so good.
You're very candid in this book about your history, your background, and certainly some of the experiences and incidents that you faced both before and while you were in the SEALs, and it really touches on, again, as you say, this concept of resilience, and resilience takes many forms. But you say that, here's a quote: resilience presents a challenge for many psychologists. Whether you can be said to have it or not largely depends not on any particular psychological test, but on the way your life unfolds. If you're lucky or unlucky enough to never experience any sort of adversity, you won't know how resilient you are. It's only when you're faced with obstacles, stress, and other environmental threats that resilience, or the lack of it, emerges. Do you succumb or do you surmount? So, Brent, the difference today is that there are many who grow up facing zero resistance in their lives. Right? Humans used to face adversity daily, but now we live, at least in the West, in an overly protected, automated pop culture bubble, right? Where and prosperity seems to be a double-edged sword. And now we've gone through a pandemic, and a lot of people are experiencing things that certain types of hardships that they've never even contemplated.
Right.
So curious as to your thoughts on. You talk about if you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to never experience any sort of adversity. I think it's a very strange time in history, because there are so many out there who haven't had the chance to flex that muscle. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll kind of first bring it back to the philosophies around SEAL training, and then segue into our current environment, with the past 10 months of what we've all been dealing with. The Naval Special Warfare community has actually invested millions of dollars and years of research to identify the mental, emotional, cognitive, and physical attributes of students more likely to navigate our sales, our training pipeline. Think about it as a sales funnel. We got to have better leads in the top of the funnel so we can close more deals and graduate more guys so we can grow the ranks of the SEAL teams. And the data doesn't reflect the narrative that many would think of. of extreme athletes and high academic achievers. And while obviously intellect and fitness are critical, you won't even get in without some baseline of that. But the data actually reflects more of the less measurable points around resilience, grit, and most importantly, a deep passion and emotional connection to service. And not just in this context, not just service of the military, but service as a special operator, service as a SEAL. And it just like in any walk of life, whether it's a personal goal, professional goal, this as well as anyone else, it's that passion and that emotional connection that helps you successfully navigate the inevitable obstacles, the anxiety, the stress, the suffering that comes with any good goal. If it doesn't have those elements, it's probably not that big of a goal. You should probably rethink what you're doing. If it doesn't have some of those elements, it's probably not worth pursuing, in my opinion. And so it's interesting to see how passion, I call it the 3 Ps in the book: passion, purpose, and persistence. And especially persistence is a given one in any walk of life, of achieving whatever we want to when it comes to work, family life, philanthropy, giving back, whatever, what have you. But purpose and passion are really those 2 interesting points that, and you can experience in the training pipeline. I experience it with the guys that I mentor. They are so focused and so passionate that they put appropriate constraints on themselves. They limit temptation. They maintain total focus. They eliminate everything from their life that is going to stand in the way of achieving that goal, yet not at the expense of other people or hurting others. They do it on an appropriate set of values. Because when I say that, it sounds like context, well, I'll step on any head to get to achieving that goal. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying within the confines of really good values and not hurting anyone else, but eliminating the people from your life that are standing in your way, the people that don't wish you well, eliminating all the distractions and shiny objects and opportunities that don't really associate with what you're trying to achieve. And taking those principles and bringing it to a current environment right now. And we've been working a lot with a lot of large organizations, the Googles and NFLs of the world, who you think, well, they've got this dialed in. They're used to change. Well,
right.
Nobody had COVID on their contingency plan when they went into 2020. I know we didn't. Our 2020 projections got shot to hell in March, and just like every other organization out there, we've had to pivot radically and adopt digital transformation and new technology and all these things that, quite frankly, made many people, including us and myself, a little uncomfortable. We've been talking about those things, but we'll do that later when we really need to. And this forced a lot of people and organizations down a path of innovation and creativity. That's one thing that's interesting about adversity. And when you think about the core fundamentals of resilience, is that you can really look at it from a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. That could be within a team or an individual. Right. Fixed mindset is, well, I am who I am. My skills are what they are. My shortcomings are what they are. Effort, not really that important, because I can't change what I am. I can't change the goals I will or will not achieve. And so you're kind of in a stagnant situation within your mind of how you approach life and work. Whereas a growth mindset is the bedrock of resilience. You don't just see challenges as, okay, they're acceptable. You crave challenges. You see setbacks as an integral part of growth and development of insight and wisdom and success. And you crave transparent feedback from peers and colleagues, and you want to be in a constant state of improvement. And the people and organizations who have been navigating this current environment of global pandemic and civil, social, and political unrest and financial and economic uncertainty, they pivoted very quickly. And they have, the book really, and the philosophy around Embrace the Suck is having that ability to not just accept adversity, but lean into it and move more quickly from that bunker of human emotion when adversity strikes, of surprise, anger, depression, the grieving stages, more quickly into action-oriented execution, taking stock of your current situation, focusing on what's in your control, developing a plan, and stepping back onto the battlefield of life.
Excellent. I'm actually going to come back to that in a moment, because there's something I want to explore with you. But before we poke on that a little bit, as the founder of TakingPoint Leadership, you partner with clients on organizational development initiatives, leadership development, and you help them create cultures of high performance. In the book, you break down the definition of resilience into three categories. And I think if you're talking about leadership development, if you're talking about organizational development, you cannot get away, especially with what you just said, you cannot get away from this idea of having to be resilient. Your leaders have to be resilient. Your culture has to be resilient. Your people have to be resilient.
Yeah.
And so in the work that you do with Taking Point, and, again, in the book, you kind of outline breaking it down further, breaking down resilience into, you mentioned the three Ps, but you've also got the three Cs. Right? So if you can break down the three Cs and then maybe comment on, the first two, and then I'll take off on one of them.
Sure. There, challenge, commitment, and control. So challenge goes back to what I was talking about around the philosophy of a growth mindset, that growth that can exist within an individual. And it definitely must exist within the majority of individuals, especially leaders in a team environment, where you see challenges as not just acceptable, you welcome them, you expect them, you have contingency plans, and also you have the resources, mindset, and things at your disposal to course correct on that battlefield. Again, whether it be in business or a literal battlefield or just your personal life, that's why preparation far exceeds the importance of planning. When it comes to the challenges we face, we teach our clients to have an 80% plan, because there is no such thing as a 100% plan. It doesn't exist. By the time you think you're there, the battlefield's changed and you got to go back and change your plan. And then commitment. Resilient people have a deep emotional connection and commitment to the goals they're trying to achieve. Going back to, whether it's the bud student or the young professional who has a dream of becoming a CEO one day, or a philanthropist who is really committed to the cause that they support or the cause that they began and started. You're pouring all of your emotion, time, and energy into achieving that goal. And oftentimes for a cause greater than yourself. Typically, and this isn't just my opinion, but research shows that whatever you do in your professional life, if it's a for-profit, a nonprofit, or military service, when you have that connection to something that's bigger than you, then you're going to go all in. And you're going to find, and that's going to drive you to navigate some of those roadblocks and obstacles. And then control goes into the variance between people in teams who spend so much time, energy, and emotion on things that are wildly outside of our control, as opposed to focusing on things that we have control over and can impact, things that are within our sphere of influence. My buddy, very close friend of mine, Mark Owen, it's not his real name, obviously it's a pseudonym, wrote No Easy Day, No Hero, phenomenal entrepreneur, and he's done great things. I'm an ordained minister, by the way. I married him and his wife. It's one of my stuff.
What? Okay, that's a segue. Boom. You just okay.
I did it online while I was feeding the baby. It took like 8 minutes.
And then you married Mark Owen and his wife.
Yeah. But my wife was like, "You really spent $40 getting the plaque?" I was like, "You're damn right I did. It's hanging in my office." Anyways, he calls it staying in your 3-foot world. He tells this interesting story about when his
great story. Please tell it.
Yeah, it's a really, really fascinating story. It's very simple, but it sets that tone of that lesson of focus on what's in your control and sphere of influence. Don't ignore the rest because you want to maintain situational awareness, but deprioritize it. Put it over to the side. Keep an eye on it in your peripheral. So he and some guys from his squadron at our tier 1 special mission unit organization within an SW. They're on a lead climber course. A lead climber, for those who don't know, is it's a rock climbing course, but you're learning to be the lead climber, meaning when you're climbing up a high face using ropes and protection, you're the lead climber. So you're setting protection. You climb 20 feet up to set the next protection. And if you fall, you're going to fall 40 feet, not 20 feet until the rope catches you. I grew up rock climbing, so I kind of, go with this story. And he was up high on the rock face, about 20, 30 feet above his last piece of protection, and frozen on the rock. Of course, the guys start to, make fun of him and stuff like that. And instructor shimmies up the face. And legend has it that he free climbed up there. And that's why I love Alex, an old story that I share in the book about free climbers, meaning no ropes. Basically, he went up there. He's like, "What's up, bro? What are you doing? What's wrong?" And, he couldn't, those who climb or have attempted to climb, you have to really trust your footholds. You have to trust your holds, your hand holds, and really be looking for the next move. So you're trying to think 2 or 3 moves ahead. And This is outside of Las Vegas. He was looking at the Las Vegas skyline. He was looking down at the guys, and the guy was like, hey, stop, right here. People in Las Vegas can't help you. Those guys down there surely aren't going to help you. Stay in your 3-foot world, meaning this is my span of influence. This is what I control. Focus on what's right here, and don't worry about the rest right now. Focus only on that. And that really goes into another one of the core components of resilience is, and again, this is research-based, not just my opinion, but people who are more resilient and exhibit more grit and mental fortitude in their personal and professional lives, what have you, have a tendency to focus more on what they can impact. And because they do, they achieve or exceed more of the goals they set, they navigate change faster, they bounce back more quickly, and therefore they're more confident. And that continues to develop and grow as they navigate, sort of the murky waters of life. And therefore, they continue to be intentional in the expansion of their comfort zone.
I think that is, and that's the one I wanted to comment on. I'm glad you told the story that Mark Owen had, that you detail in the book about him climbing the rock face, because that, I think, is such a powerful piece of advice for so many, and discussing that in the book as something significant. It's very significant, right? This idea,
it's timely now too, because of so much in the world right now we can't control.
Exactly. And you say, you say here in the book, failure can result in us focusing primarily on the cause of our current adversity. We look backward instead of forward, you say, right? We focus on the elements we have no control over, as opposed to developing an action plan and leveraging what is in our control.
Right.
And
that's really the foundation of mission planning when you think about it. And obviously on any battlefield, there's elements in your control, there's elements out of your control. You develop contingencies for what you think might occur. And then you have the what ifs of things that you don't even know, what could be coming down the pipe and stand in your way of achieving that goal or completing that mission. So it's important to not just take stock of your resources and what's in your control, but also understand threats, blockages, and the other obstacles that you may face, and have a little bit of a mindset that there's probably something on that list that you haven't thought of, because that is the bedrock of Murphy's Law.
Fantastic. So, okay, I'm gonna give another quote here from you in the book. So later, in an effort to continue my service and give back to the Naval Special Warfare community, I mentored, and you mentioned this earlier, I mentor young people through the SEAL program. When I first began mentoring these eager and determined young men, the questions were the same ones I had when I was in their shoes. What's the hardest part? How did you get through it? Is it more mental or physical? What's the best way to train for this program? Before investing my limited time in being a mentor and knowing most of these young men might fail in their attempt, I needed a process for selecting candidates. This is very interesting. You say, I had to uncover the answers to a few key questions. Which of these guys have the grit to get it done? How do I determine who has the appropriate level of resilience? So my question is, why do some spend years preparing only to quit on day one, while others crush the training with a smile on their face? It's actually your question. Sorry.
Yeah.
In the book. So what I'm wondering is, it's so interesting. So there's a selection process before you ever get to the selection process. You've got a selection process for who you're going to mentor, and then they'll get selected. How did you answer those questions? That question that you just posed there. Why do some spend years preparing only to quit on day one, while others crush the training with a smile on their face? How did you answer these questions, and what did you find out?
I think I answered these questions along the way. So in hindsight, I was very wise in my selection process. But really, I jest. But I'll give 3 examples of young guys I mentored, all close friends of mine. I mean, they're like family. I make them babysit my children.
Payback.
For example, I'll use these quick stories, as an example to help answer the question. The first young guy I mentored, excuse me, not the first, but one of the first, was the only one I've ever mentored who came out of high school. The other guys have been officers. And so kind of a different context. And, one, for example, comes from a billionaire family from Texas, has everything at his disposal. I met him at one of our SEAL Family Foundation charity events in New York, one of our big annual galas. And we had brought his father out, and he brought his son, and his son was about to graduate from University of Texas and was going to join the Marine Corps. And I said, look, let me talk to this young man. No offense to the Marine Corps, but I had other initiatives. And so he segued over, and I worked with him and trained with him. Not that he needed it necessarily, but it was a good way to just spend time together, talk about the culture of the teams, and just have an accountability partner. So I trained with him, and which was a bit of a challenge because he was 23 years old and I was a little bit older. So I had to get in shape before I trained with him. So it was good for me too.
It's great.
So put that to the surface. Crushed buds, SEAL officer, literally just retired out of the teams. Phenomenal career. And now he's in, back in the world of finance in New York. Now, this other kid who reached out to me, that was one trajectory. This other kid who reached out to me starting when he was, I believe, a sophomore in high school, reached out through one of the social media channels and reached out to me and Mark Owen and a few others. And it was interesting because of his tenacity, which I got. He was young and he was excited. But I made it out of respect for his time and my time. I made it clear that it's not much I could really do for him when he's living in East Texas and I'm out here in San Diego, and he's a sophomore in high school. So if he was going to go in right out of high school, which our candidates right out of high school have a much lower success rate, just because a little bit too young, not enough emotional maturity, not enough life experience. Those are some of the research we've done. Just my opinion, from what I've seen, is that it's just lower success rate for the younger guys. And we periodically would chat or send messages through social media, and then I forget what happened in between, but I remember I just got home from the office one day and I got a text message from this guy. He said, just checked into buds. I was like, holy shit. I hadn't heard from him in probably 6 months to a year.
Whoa.
Just checked into buds. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, what are you doing on Saturday? Come over to the house. And it's been a speeding freight train for him ever since. Like he far more disciplined and focused, no offense to the other guys, than the officers that I mentored. Younger, but far more disciplined. That going back to what we talked about, that emotional connection, that deep passion to eliminate everything in his life that has nothing to do with achieving that goal. All he wants to do is be a tier 1 special operator, not just an operator, but a tier 1 special operator. He's a good Christian boy from East Texas who cares deeply about country, family, and all he does is study his craft and stay fit, and he just churns and burns. And then another one that I touched on briefly in the book, another different situation, a young kid who grew up out here in Rancho Santa Fe, where I live, and my wife met his wife at my wife met his mom at a charity event, and it came up, and she said, well, my son, he just joined the Navy, similar trajectory to mine. He graduated from University of Miami, was working in finance out in Florida, right, and then decided that he wanted to do something different. And his mom passed away a week before he started Buds of a brain aneurysm in a car in Manhattan, out of nowhere, on a ladies' trip to Manhattan for the weekend. And he persevered. He got rolled a couple times. Luckily, I had some of my friends and former teammates who are first phase instructors, so I got to kind of keep tabs on him, just like a parent would, which actually annoys most of the instructors. But now he's a graduated. Now he's an operator. So, but between those three different wildly different scenarios, you see the types of areas that come. And so when it comes back to resilience, you think about the difference between me and my background and David Goggins, who wrote the foreword. They're same class together, same boat crew, wildly different upbringings. I mean, David grew up with racism and an emotionally and physically abusive household, childhood obesity, learning disabilities, just constant volatility. Whereas I didn't grow up with any of that. I grew up in a upper middle class family in Dallas, Texas. I went to private school my whole life. I've never been fired from a job or experienced abuse emotionally or physically. And so that's what's kind of interesting about the philosophy and the principles around resilience and mental fortitude is, where does it come from? It doesn't necessarily come from a life of hardship. It doesn't necessarily come from the opposite of that or somewhere in between. There's something innate within all of us. And I believe everyone has this ability, if you tap into it in the right way, to be intentional in how we develop resilience by the choices we make.
That's good news. That's really good news, because that was my thought in what I mentioned before when I was talking about how there's so little adversity today, typically, that many growing up don't have so many of the challenges we would have faced even 100 years ago.
Right.
And it on the surface, it appears that you would have to have the background of a David Goggins to become
Sure.
David Goggins.
Right.
So what
But
you're
most of us don't want to be David Goggins. I say that with love. I'm just saying. That sounds very painful to me.
It is very, very painful.
Talking to one of our other classmates who's now a FBI special agent and was a SEAL for many years, and we're talking about David Goggins' 40% rule. When your brain's telling you you're done, you're only 40% of the way there. And my buddy was like, "You tell David that I am perfectly happy with my 40%." That's his.
Absolutely one of a kind individual. Okay, so go back to the book, a quote here, and this is a bit more introspective. So I shifted to the left across the doorway, scanning as much of the room as I could before entering. I moved to the side of the entrance and waited for the shoulder squeeze that signaled that a teammate was ready to move in with me. But there was no squeeze. Everyone was dealing with other threats. And then a man emerged from the darkness with an AK-47 pointed right at me. From the doorway, I took immediate action, placing 2 rounds in the center of his chest, followed by 1 at the base of his nose. His momentum carried him as he fell to the ground at my feet. I flipped my night vision goggles up onto my helmet and looked down. His bottom jaw was severed completely. He couldn't have been more than 19. What the F? You stupid SOB. I was livid. Why did he have to force my hand? Back at base later that night, I buried my face in my pillow, consumed with pain and confusion. I reflected on the early stages of my SEAL training, how horrific it was, and how much resilience I needed to navigate the physical and emotional challenges we faced each day. So, Brent, I mean, that's a pretty powerful paragraph there that you describe in the book. And we talk about resilience, talk about the 3 Ps, the 3 Cs. And for most of us, it's that stuff is just about accomplishing goals in life and business. But for you and other special operators, I mean, your goal is going into combat. And here we are talking about navigating the challenges, not of business, but of life and death, both your own and the teammates you're responsible for on a daily basis. And of course, when it comes to killing the enemy, what I'm curious about is, does the training you receive prepare you for the significant emotional challenges of being the arbiter of life and death in the moment that you described there? I mean, how does resilience factor in dealing with the psychological weight of it all?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's certain elements of training, obviously, that help you prepare relentlessly for success on the battlefield on an op. And we train relentlessly. People assume we're downrange fighting the enemy all the time. 75% of the time, we're somewhere training. And then when you're on deployment, if you're not eating, sleeping, or operating, you're training. You're working out. You're on the shooting range. You're rehearsing ops. You're rehearsing close quarters combat skills. You're in a constant state of training, evolution, and studying intel reports and lessons learned from the battlefield, and using that to adapt our tactics and strategies. But obviously, when we talk about resilience and on literal and figurative battlefields, there are certain elements of life that we face that there's nothing that's going to train you for that. Obviously, there'll be certain baseline psychological traits and things that help you or don't navigate the unexpected. Now, obviously, going into situations like that, you know that those types of scenarios could be inevitable. You don't wish for them, but you know that it's war, it's combat, and especially, that story is from, a first deployment, the new guy. And, we were some of the first SEALs in Iraq in 2003, and kind of not rewriting the book on urban combat and close quarters battle, but essentially figuring out what works, what doesn't, and using shitty intel sometimes, not always, no offense to our agency partners, but when you're moving at the speed of war with limited infrastructure and you've got a network of resources to gain intel from, or you're compensating people for that intel, you're going to get a big variance between quality intelligence and intelligence that not in that situation. The target was nothing like the source had described. We didn't know, how many enemy were going to be on target or how big it was going to be. We came in a little thin, and of course, on a lot of these targets, as all special operators know, you have multi-generations of people on there. It's not just the bad guys. You've got children, grandchildren, grandparents, great-grandparents. You have usually a few combatants mixed with many non-combatants. Which is why you have to be careful and thoughtful in how you engage on those targets. You have to be able to dial it up and dial it down real fast. I've been in situations where you're breaching the door, non-combatants are injured from the explosive breach, and 1 minute you're in a gunfight, 2 minutes later, I'm carrying 2 4-year-old girls who are barefoot across the room because there's glass everywhere. It's a weird emotional roller coaster that all special operators experience on ops like that. Again, my contribution pales. I can't imagine what it's like to have been guys like Mark or other similar operators from SEALs or Delta or Marines or Air Force who've done 13 combat deployments, 14 combat deployments. Can't even fathom that. So compounding what I've experienced with that type of magnitude, it's challenging, and that's why it's challenging for for operators when they transition, or even when they're still active duty. Oftentimes, not to segue too far down this path, when we think about the effects of post-traumatic stress. Well, for career operators, they're experiencing post-traumatic stress while they're operating. It's not like something you get when you retire.
Right. Right.
Granted, studies show that a lot of those symptoms and effects of post-traumatic stress can emerge 10 years after your last sort of traumatic experience. Sometimes it's quicker. But again, if let's say you're a 20-year operator, well, you're navigating the challenges of that while you're doing the same job. And as we have suicide rate now is it's like it's never been before. We're losing 20 to 22 military veterans a day to suicide. One thing on a lighter note, though, that we've seen that's positive is a shift in the culture and the attitude and mindset around being more open about how we address it, not just as an organization. When we think about resilience practices and emotional health, and guys seeking treatment for TBI and for these other things, as opposed to, well, we don't talk about that. That's that's weakness. PTSD is not a real thing. I've heard guys literally say that. Some guys that I've served with, they really say, well, that's not a thing. I'm like, thing. It's like, I don't know why someone would say that, but point is, we are seeing a big paradigm shift in the culture of the military and in the special operations community, where guys are being more open about it. They're being, frankly, more responsible in how they proactively help to mend their own mental health. Because especially if you want to transition and have a successful career, a successful marriage or relationship, be a great dad, it's on you, unfortunately, and your peers and people you lean on to go get help and get it on a regular basis, not just go talk to someone once or go through your decompression training. That's great, but that's not going to help people who really need significant transformation when it comes to, especially the impacts, like I said, of TBI. It's not just psychological thing, that's your brain being injured and has all these different impacts. So I'm saying that in the context of resilience. And one of the other core components of resilience is being thoughtful and intentional in how we help heal ourselves. The book Embrace the Suck is not meant to be wrapped in this macho type of philosophy. It's about proper suffering practices and grieving in an appropriate way and navigating all those different complexities of life and work with health in mind, not with, the macho attitude of, well, I just got to suck it up. That's kind of the counterintuitive approach to the title of the book, and the content itself is, as you've seen, is, it's not about teaching people to become SEALs. It's about drawing from some of those practices to live a healthier, more meaningful, purpose-driven life.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think a very stark reality. In the book, you mentioned how many have died from suicide. I think the number was 45,000, I believe, which is, it's an unbelievably staggering number. And it's great to hear that the culture is changing. I've had a number of conversations with guys who have gone through therapy, and they recognize PTS or PTSD, and how critical it is that operators that need help get help, and a lot of them are setting up. Tom Satterley, for instance, Delta Force operator, him and his wife Jen Satterley have set up a foundation. So there's a lot of that now going on.
Yeah,
a lot of it's a lot more open now, which is great. Okay, another quote for you. So we were a mere 4 hours into Hell Week, and we were lying in the surf zone, arms length, feet toward the beach. We shivered uncontrollably in our wonderful human chain of miserable convulsions. The instructors had ordered a round of rocking chairs. I gasped violently as my head reemerged from the icy froth of the 55-degree surf zone. A perfect cocktail of salt water and mucus streamed from my nostrils and down onto my lips and chin. My sinuses and my eyes burned from being constantly purged by the Pacific Ocean, and the most unimaginably morose feeling had swept over me. This incomprehensible pain was going to last 24 hours a day until Friday afternoon. And it would only get worse as the week went on. Light at the end of the tunnel, not even a tiny effing glimmer. In that moment, I quickly learned a fabulously simple solution. What was your solution? Do you remember that?
Yeah, just give up. Don't fight it. And I really do. This is authentic. I remember this moment where we were laying there and I was kind of looking up to the white condo high-rise towers that loom over the beach between the Special Warfare Center and the Hotel Del there in Coronado. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that was, obviously we knew this was coming. And the interesting thing about Hell Week is the class reports to the classroom on Sunday morning. It's probably going to happen in the late afternoon, early evening at some point, but they don't tell you when Hell Week. It's not like, well, it's 7:30, we're doing breakout. They do that on purpose because it's like the anxiety is just eating away at the core of your soul. It's this weird paradox because it's going to be possibly one of the worst weeks of your life, but critical for your journey. But at the same time, you also just want to get it started. You just want to get it started and get it over with as quickly as possible. And then eventually, breakout happens. And I remember our class leader, the highest ranking officer in our class, he read aloud to us the St. Crispin's Day speech from William Shakespeare's Henry V, as one of his methods of motivating us. And he read aloud those famed lines, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. And John passed away 4 days later. He drowned in the pool, suffering from pulmonary edema exacerbated by the pneumonia he had for 3 days. And obviously going into that, we didn't know that would be one of the outcomes, which is interestingly unique. It doesn't happen ever. I mean, that type of thing doesn't happen all that often. And I just remember in that moment that there was no other solution to navigate what was going to be such an arduous crucible than accepting it, just leaning into it, and in a way, not to sound like I'm trying to be hardcore or macho, but wanting more. So setting my expectations for the absolute worst and then hopefully being pleasantly surprised when it's almost horrible, but not as horrible as you want. Kind of going back to the forward David Goggins did to one of my mentees, where he was telling him, he's like, pray for it to be the worst Hell Week you've ever had. Pray for it to be the worst Hell Week any class has ever had, for it to be cold, to be rainy. Pray to God that he's trying to break you every minute. And I'm summarizing, he used more colorful language than I just did. But it was some variation of that, where I realized that again, going back to what's in your control and what's not, I was in it. There was no turning back. There was only one outcome that was going to be acceptable, and that was completion, outside of snapping my leg in half or breaking my neck or drowning, which, those things happen, obviously. But outside of those elements, focus on what's in your control. What's on your control is right here, right now, taking it evolution by evolution by evolution. And guys would tell you that had been through it, or the kinder instructors would say, don't worry about what's happening tomorrow. Focus on this evolution, focusing on make it to lunch. In those evolutions in the afternoon, make it to dinner, make it through the night, make it to the sunrise. Just those little kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time helps you compartmentalize in a healthy way. So because if you try to mentally consume everything that you think's going to happen in that week, your brain would explode. You'd be like, you know what? I'm out.
Right. I mean, and, you talk about, it wasn't just what was going on there, as you were starting Hell Week, laying there in the surf, knowing that this is not going to end for like 5 days. It's going to be nonstop. But like, you went in there, you mentioned that your class endured Hell Week in the winter when the water temperatures in Coronado can be in the 50s. And you say the mind fuck of being freezing cold and soaking wet 24 hours a day is what drives most students to throw in the towel. In fact, you talk about how 50% of the class, by the time you even get to Hell Week, has already quit. And that you were going into it, and you said you had a hairline fracture in your left elbow that was causing severe swelling. You had overuse injuries to the iliotibial bands.
IT bands, yeah, iliotibial bands, yeah.
In both legs.
Yeah.
And a flesh-eating bacteria eating away at your right calf. So
the icing on the cake.
Icing on the cake. And then the very sad story about your class leader, John, who, in the book you talk about what an incredibly positive, inspirational guy this was, and how he would inspire you guys with passages, for instance, from Shakespeare, and then he ends up dying, drowning in a pool during Hell Week. So, I mean, you talk about what, going into what, you talk about such an aptly named week, Hell Week, and what you have to go through to, in that crucible that tests everyone. And then you talk about just give in, right? You mentioned this concept of just give in. And it's interesting because you go into it with a culture that has kind of, and you say this is counterintuitive to embrace the suck, right? But it's almost like we're supposed to grit our teeth and bear it, right? As opposed to no, just give into it, and right. So it's
which seem like the same thing, but they're actually two different mindsets. It's subtle, but those are two different approaches to adversity.
Completely. Yeah. So I think it's a very powerful piece of advice, and you talk about it more in the book, which is great. Okay, so how about this? You talk about this, which is this concept of accept and forgive. Holding on to hatred and resentment for ourselves or others only poisons you. Now, what I want to say about that is, others would say it drives you, right? Take that hate. That hate is right, and bottle up inside and let that be the fuel. But you right. Talk about something again a little bit different, a different concept. Can you elaborate on your perspective here about this concept of
sure?
Of acceptance?
It kind of goes into some of the suffering practices that I'm talking about. Again, the book's not meant to be this macho approach to just swallowing down pain and suffering and putting it in a box, because we all know that that's not a realistic, healthy way to approach life in general, and will only exacerbate any types of problems that any of us face. But the accepting and forgiving, when I was writing about that, I wasn't thinking so much about my, military career, although you want to cling to hatred for the terrorist who killed your teammate, or the things that for your hatred for yourself, for the things, I call it the layers of guilt, the things you did, the things you didn't do, the people you couldn't save, the things you saw when it comes to non-combatants, but also just in life in general. When I transitioned out, I've been, I've been, this isn't a sob story, but I've been a full-time single parent, like not just a single parent, a full-time single parent to a toddler for several years while trying to build two businesses. And there's I'll spare the nuances, but for a dad to be a single parent in California, things have to have gone south on the other side pretty bad. And so, but then again, also, and for many years, I clung to just extreme hatred and resentment for not just putting me in that position, but for more importantly, of course, as parents, we think about our children and putting our children in adverse situations. So, but again, of course, over time, we realized that you can only cling to those things for so long, but before it starts to eat away at your soul, and before it starts to have such a detrimental long-term adverse effect on you that doesn't necessarily have to happen if we can move more quickly towards the acceptance piece. And then, of course, the forgiveness for others, but sometimes it's more about forgiveness for ourselves. I know that intimately, it has a direct correlation between our military veterans and special operators and just the nuances of the job itself. Oftentimes it's about being intentional and getting help, but also finding ways to forgive yourself first. It's hard to forgive others and move on into that sort of mindset and creating that narrative around forgiveness and adversity until you can forgive yourself for the mistakes and the shortcomings or the things that we do that aren't so great, that we're not so proud of.
Yeah, powerful advice. So let's talk about, I think this kind of segues from here. Let's talk about values, because there's a great chapter in the book entitled, "Oh, and maybe your values are all wrong." Right. So I'll quote you. If our values don't align with what we want out of life, the things that really matter, then we face far greater challenges than when they do. Sometimes our perspective is skewed. We chase the wrong dreams and faulty aspirations that leave us empty, void, and that leave us empty and unfulfilled. So how does one choose the right values?
It's interesting. This kind of goes back to my inspiration for the book that has a lot to do with the work we do with organizations. So if you think about it, if high-performing business organizations have a solid set of core values and supporting behaviors and the associated accountability mechanisms to achieve high performance, same thing with sports teams, special operations organizations like the SEAL ethos, which essentially is our sort of mission, vision, values, and culture manifesto all kind of wrapped up into one piece. Then why wouldn't we do that for ourselves or our families? Why not have a team charter for your family? Why not have a set of core values for yourself, or if you're in a family, for your family setting, that in a perfect world, core values should be the guiding principles behind which we make all decisions, personally, professionally, the relationships we're in, the people or organizations we partner with, or our clients and customers from a business standpoint. In theory, core values should drive everything. And if they're authentic and they've been designed also to align people towards achieving common goals, then that should be your charter and your lane markers, so to speak, towards achieving whatever desired outcome you're trying to accomplish in life and work. And so I thought it'd be interesting in a book like this to have a chapter not just about the importance of values and what happens when we fall short of those values or stray from those values, of course, which we all do because we're human, but also, what are the potential positive benefits of taking a very strategic approach into identifying what those values are, identifying, the behaviors you expect of yourselves and others associated with those values, and how you're going to hold yourself accountable. And not just thinking about it while you're swimming or on a run or on a bike ride, but documenting it, putting it on paper, putting it in a Google Doc, tattooing it on the back of your eyelids if necessary. And then thinking about it a lot, talking about it a lot, celebrating wins in your life or your work associated with those values or with a team. We talk a lot about that with our clients we work with is, if you're going to navigate change in an organization or navigate change with COVID, or other types of situations, then celebrating wins is important. Obviously, learning from the losses and shortcomings is important, but if you're going to use values as a guiding light towards navigating that meandering path, then you have to talk about them all the time. You have to use them as a tool to not just make decisions, but then learn from them. When you fall short, well, we didn't meet that objective. How do we possibly lose sight of our values associated with not achieving that goal? Or celebrating a win. We crushed that project, or we landed the big client, or our family has successfully navigated a global pandemic, and we feel like we're coming out of the other side. Well, look back at the values. How did our family core values, or how did my individual core values help me successfully overcome those obstacles? And then if you do that with intention enough, it becomes habitual. And so those values then become more and more authentic, and you can use them to navigate change more successfully than when we don't have a set of principles that help guide us.
This is really interesting because it's kind of the opposite of what a lot of people do, which is they choose their goals and then they discard whatever values or principles get in the way of reaching that objective. But by the same token, it's hit that target or bust, right? That's it, and whatever it takes to get there. And you actually also quote in the book James Clear, American author, entrepreneur, world famous photographer, who says, making better choices is often a matter of choosing better constraints.
Yeah, I love that.
Wow. By limiting your options to those that fit your values, you're taking an important step to ensuring that your behavior matches your beliefs. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it kind of goes into what we were talking about a minute ago. It's like if you're authentically designing specific core values, then in a perfect world, all your decisions should associate with those. But it also goes into what he said about being intentional in putting certain constraints on your life, limiting your choices. That helps you also navigate temptation and the shiny objects and all the opportunities that are out there, especially in this world of constant disruption and communication, where we think, well, that's a great idea, and the teams are called the good idea fairy. Well, there is such a thing as bad ideas. And limiting your constraints and being intentional in that effort helps you eliminate those unnecessary distractions, the unnecessary temptation. All the things like we talked about with these young men who are focused on becoming a SEAL operator, the ones who are successful, they put really, really healthy constraints on their life and eliminate everything else. And then of course, making sure those lane markers, like I said, are associated with what your values are, and then focusing on that alone and being intentional on how you remove the distractions and oftentimes the people from our lives that either don't wish us well, the haters, or even longtime friends who have grown apart and will stand in your way or holding you back. We all have to do that, especially as you get older and you have a family and you have a career. We don't have time to have 50 really good friends. It's most people I know, especially people who I talk to or have been mentors of mine, they have a close connection of maybe 5 really good friends who are actual friends, not acquaintances, but friends, mentors, peers that they can lean on in the most adverse times. And that social connectivity is important for all of us. You can only achieve so much on your own, without trusted peers and mentors and friends that can help push you down that path. But I love what James Clear said about putting the right constraints. It's just a phenomenal quote that he said, and it's so simple, but most of us just kind of suck at doing that consistently.
Big time. Look, you get into a fair bit of, you bring a lot of examples from your time in the SEALs. You also get into a fair bit of psychology in the book as well. And you also draw upon the stories of individuals that have made it through intense and arduous situations. You talk about Goggins, of course, a friend of yours, and in your class, in the chapter entitled "Do Something That Sucks Every Day," which is a quote from Goggins. You share a very powerful view on how to deal with stress. So your perspective is on how positive a force pressure and stress can be in your life. Can you elaborate on that concept of stress as something we should embrace?
Sure, and a lot of this is one of the great core components of success is to surround yourself with people much smarter than you, and then you just take credit for all their work. No, but a lot of the people on our team are PhDs in behavioral psychology and organizational excellence and things like that. And there's a ton of research out there that shows obviously a large abundance just with the detrimental impacts of anxiety and stress and all these tools and resources and healthy habits we can do to eliminate it. But at the same time, from a human defense mechanism and developmental standpoint, stress and anxiety aren't just inevitable, but they have a really positive impact on how we grow and how we develop and how we build, grit and mental fortitude. Kind of going back to the beginning of the book and the beginning of the conversation, if you're unlucky enough to never experience any real true adversity, you've crippled yourself, or someone has crippled you for life as an adult in the real world. And so it really goes into understanding how to navigate stress and anxiety in a healthy way, but not shying away from it, knowing that it's inevitable. It's going to be part of your life, professionally and personally, and not always finding ways to eliminate it, but leaning into it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, you even talk about how the body's stress response was not designed to kill us. In fact, right, the evolutionary goal of the stress response was to help boost the body and mind into enhanced functioning. And that, you mentioned that, and immediately, what I'm thinking Wim Hof, right? I don't know if you're familiar. You're smiling, so perhaps you're familiar with Wim Hof, but the Dutch extreme athlete who sits in freezing ice cold baths for 2 hours and climbs Everest in his shorts, right? But he proved in a scientific experiment that, in fact, the stress response, if you activate it on purpose, those stress chemicals actually can heal the body, which is, again, all very counterintuitive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, but it's finding ways to tap into that, which is, which isn't easy, but you have to either be in or manufacture those uncomfortable situations to garner that.
So how do you do the right things? How would you advise people to do the right things that suck every day? Right.
The philosophy around that chapter is really around goal achievement. So not just engaging in things that suck just for the sake of, punishing yourself, but when it's associated with achieving goals that align with your values, that are within the healthy constraints that you put, in your life and your work, then identifying the challenges, the obstacles, the threats and blockages, the things that make you cringe, the things that you're not good at yet. And that's what we teach our clients too when we're talking about mental fortitude is, well, I'm not good at that. Well, just add a yet on the end of that, because if you're trying to achieve a certain goal, if it's a good goal and a worthy pursuit, then it will have pain, suffering, and anxiety associated with the achievement of that goal. Otherwise, maybe it's a waste of your time. Maybe choose a different goal. But then identifying those threats and blockages that stand in your way, labeling them, identify, how you typically approach those things, and being intentional in how you plan to tackle those challenges. That goes into being intentional in the fine and subtle art of comfort zone expansion. Identify those things and practice those things with intention every day if need be. For example, I'm a student and teacher of leadership. But as a leader over the years, and this is based on feedback and 360 reviews and mentorship and coaching, is that one of the things that I struggle with as a leader is conflict avoidance. Interestingly enough, on the battlefield, I'll run to the sound of gunfire. In a business setting, oftentimes I've had a history of kind of avoiding the tough conversations, or the employee that I have to let go, or the board member who I know is going to scream at me, or the customer who is probably going to cancel his contract and I'm going to get an earful before he does. I'm usually like, oh, I'm going to put that on the list for Thursday. And then Thursday comes around, I'm like, probably should reschedule that call for Tuesday, or I delegate it to someone else. Now, don't disregard the importance of delegation. However, in all seriousness, that's something, for example, that I've tried to be intentional in practicing. Tackling challenges head on, having the difficult conversations now, not tomorrow, And once you do that, obviously it's a developmental practice where you realize, well, I guess that wasn't that tough of a conversation. I learned a little bit from it. It wasn't that scary of a board member, or the client actually didn't cancel his contract. The problem was that the magnitude wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And you realize, okay, that wasn't that bad. I could do that again, and then I could do it again, and I could do it again. And then you're expanding your comfort zone in that area. Check. Move on to the next thing, and move the goalposts, and keep doing that with the things that make you uncomfortable, or the things that stand in your way of achieving certain goals. And then you're in that constant state of improvement. And then sometimes the things that used to seem insurmountable become normal and part of your everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you talk about the chapter's called "Choose Wisely What You Suffer For," and you talk about purposeful suffering. And there's a healthy way to suffer, right? And I think it could be as simple as having those hard conversations that you don't want to have. They're painful. They really are. So, it's great advice, but you can't suffer for any purpose without mastering self-discipline. And you get into self-discipline in this book, and you have a bunch of steps that you go through as you talk about how to kind of master self-discipline. And I wanted to ask you a question on some of them, because you talked earlier about we talked about eliminating about your values, but having constraints. We talked about how some of the best candidates that you have mentored have had this ability to eliminate everything in their life that gets in the way of their goal. So you talked about eliminating distractions and this kind of thing. But self-discipline seems like something that we often know we must control. We must get our arms around.
Right.
God forbid, even master self-discipline. But how does one actually go about mastering self-discipline, other than saying, okay, I know I've got to be more disciplined? That just doesn't work, right? So
no.
how would you, so
it kind of goes, I talk a lot about the book and about having a good plan. I mean, and that philosophy of eating the elephant one bite at a time. You're not going to, master self-discipline in areas where you typically, err on the side of weakness by just diving headfirst. While it's good and admirable to be like, I'm going cold turkey and I'm going to stop doing this, or I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to develop this great fitness regimen, and I'm starting today. Well, if it's a far cry from anything you're used to doing, typically you're going to be more successful if you dial it back a little bit and just take it one step at a time, small incremental daily decisions. And then, because you're going to build more confidence that way. That's why, I joke in the book about how New Year's resolutions and this newfound discipline is for losers. I love the time bound. Any goal must be concise, measurable, and time bound. But don't call it a New Year's resolution, because studies show that come February 15th, you will have not done any of that shit. But in all seriousness, it's really about making lifestyle choices and making lasting change in yourself or in a team and an organization. Most lasting change, or most change initiatives, for example, I read about this in my first book, in an individual or a team, fail or fall short of meeting their intended objective because, you're starting at step 7 of 10 as opposed to starting at step 1, and creating that foundational mindset shift, changing the narrative, being intentional in what you want to accomplish, and journaling about that, developing a plan, putting it on paper, running that plan by trusted friends or mentors, red team that plan, poke holes in it, and then being intentional every day in the steps you're going to take to build self-discipline towards achieving that goal, or eating cleaner, or improving your fitness regimen, or building your business, or becoming a better leader, or a better spouse, or a better parent. Don't try to do it all at once. Don't just be like, it's great, because we've all been through that, where like, you want to gut punch yourself and you're like, I am changing right now, everything. Right. Total. while that's great, I encourage people, because I've failed miserably at this in the past, to take it one step at a time. Break the big goal into bite-sized chunks, and therefore they're going to be more achievable, more measurable, and you'll build confidence along that path more quickly because you're less likely to fall short.
So you also talk about, and again, I implore everyone to read the book to kind of look at these, there's a lot going on there, but also when it comes to self-discipline, you lay out these steps. You've mentioned some of them. One that I found really powerful was you talk about, I think it's step 6, change your perception about willpower. Change your perception about willpower. You say that, in short, our internal conceptions about willpower and self-control can determine how disciplined we are. How so? Because that, I think, is definitely something that a lot of people fall short on. It's that whole concept of willpower. They go and they say, I don't have any willpower.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's two sort of seemingly conflicting points I talk about in the book around willpower, where some research shows that, well, willpower depletes over time or throughout the day. If you exhibit all your willpower at work, then you might be, short and snippy with your wife and kids when you get home because you're frustrated and you're exhausted mentally, emotionally, physically. Whereas, there's, expanding research on the fact that willpower is like your resilience muscles. You can train willpower, you can train resilience, you can train mental fortitude into yourself. But again, going back to what we talked about, by making small incremental decisions and choices so that you can slowly develop that willpower and mental strength over time, as opposed to just trying to decide, I'm going to be much more disciplined starting right now and do all these great things. Whereas, your willpower muscles are more likely to develop, just like in any fitness regimen, if you have a very solid strategic plan and you engage in that path purposefully, as opposed to just trying to do it all at once.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's fascinating to think that you can actually not only build resilience, but, willpower isn't something you have to be born with, that you can actually build it over time like a muscle. And then, you talk, you also get into, I think there's a technique that psychologists use called implementation intention. I mean, there's cool stuff in there in the book that kind of gets into it. But throughout the book, you actually, so here's another big theme for me in the book. So resilience was one of them. I love this idea of control. But throughout the book, you often point out the significance of not living a life filled with regrets. And I'll quote you here. One of my favorite poems is all about living a life of value, knowing your core values and living by them every day. The poem is titled Death Song, and it was written by Tecumseh. The poem is widely shared in the naval special warfare community and in many ways captures our values and how we approach life and work. As Tecumseh said, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your death song and die like a hero going home. The point is, we're all going to have to sing our death song someday. What will the words of your song be? And, I mean, it's a powerful poem. There's more to it as well. But where did this notion of living a life of no regrets come from? Because you definitely mentioned this in a number of areas in the book.
Mm-hmm. It really came from, I wanted to end the book with something powerful that ties all together. So, the final chapter is titled, We're All Going to Die, So Get Off Your Ass and Execute. And a lot of the inspiration of that chapter really comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where the second habit is thinking. He says thinking with the end in mind, but I say thinking and behaving and planning with the end in mind, and managing that list of life regrets starting today. We do have a very significant impact on the things that we do not want to regret when that inevitable day when this short life comes to an end. So it behooves us to start managing that list now when it comes to, and I end the chapter with a framework that people can print out or fill out when, what do I not want to regret when it comes to family, faith, love, relationships, work, giving back, and it goes on and on. And it's meant to be a tool for the user to fill that out now and start behaving that way, start interacting that way with relationships, have those difficult conversations, apologize more, say I love you more, make better decisions when it comes to life and work. Because, there's going to be certain things, of course, when this life comes to an end, like you are going to regret certain things. That's inevitable. But be intentional in thinking with the end in mind. Developing your own personal exit strategy is a phenomenal way to plan for your life. Just like in business, oftentimes a business, especially if there's some defined exit, you start with the exit strategy in mind, then you build the business backwards from there. Just like a good mission plan, so to speak. You know your desired outcome. Let's work backwards to build the necessary actions, the resources, identifying the threats and blockages, and and the contingencies that we're going to need to achieve that mission, achieve that desired outcome, or achieve that exit strategy. Start planning for that now.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect that's a perfect way to kind of wind down the podcast. I mean, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much, Brent, for being here with us.
I've got a newborn in there, so I'm happy to hang out with you in the studio.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess you talk throughout the book, you give these opportunities for the reader to kind of exercise that that concept of, okay, it's a great concept, choosing the right values, but here's how you do it. And you actually take the reader through, hey, here's what you need to do. And so you have an exercise in there, but as well, at the end of the book, as you said, you have that chart that you put in there. I've never seen that before, right? That chart that you said is, on the left side, it lists when it comes to this part of my life, right? You've got those areas listed: family, health, my purpose. And on the right side of the checklist is that corresponding space for I never want to regret. So when it comes to my health, I never want to regret what? Boom, 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 boom. And I was looking at that chart and I'm thinking, that's, if you actually fill that out, I mean, that's very powerful. Have you filled it out?
I have, actually. It's funny you mentioned that, because I was like, I should probably start using some of these tools. No, I'm kidding. But most of the tools, to your point, saying I've never seen that before, it's something that's not a tool we use in my company or something I've seen. It's just, it seemed like an impactful mental model to close the book out with. And I say, here's a tool, you can expand on these different categories. Now it's on you to how you want to use it. It is, like you said, a powerful and very impactful mental process to go through, and it's not as easy as you think it is in this simple chart. When it comes to family, what do I not want to regret? I needed like 5 extra pieces of paper when you really start thinking about it. But then if you're authentic and writing those things down or journaling them or creating that list, then the hard part comes. Then the hard part comes in changing your behavior, improving this, improving that, eliminating certain things from your life, putting better constraints in place so that you can live with intention to not have those regrets. So that's the hard part. The planning part and the list is easy. It's about the execution that's usually the challenge.
Powerful stuff, Brent. Powerful stuff. It really is a fascinating book. It's a great read. You got some great stories in there about your time in the SEALs. You got some incredible advice in there from your experience, with your company and with training clients. You got psychology in there. It is well worth the time to read that book and actually use it. I'm taking some great lessons away. I wanted to thank you so much for doing the show and ask, where can our readers and our listeners, I'm wrapped up in your book, where can our listeners learn more about you and about the work that you're doing?
Sure. Thank you, Lawrence. No, it's been a phenomenal conversation. I hope we do this again sometime. But our company website's TakingPointLeadership.com. Obviously, that's our corporate website with our consultative services. I also have a Forbes leadership column, as you mentioned before. So if you just look up Forbes, Brent Gleeson, or some keyword variation of that, you'll find my author page. It has hundreds of articles that I've written over the past 7 years around leadership and behavioral science and organizational excellence. And I'm on social media on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram at Brent_Gleeson and on Twitter as well. The book itself, of course, available on all online retailers, the Amazons and Barnes Nobles of the world. It's on Audible as well, and in your brick and mortar bookstores, if anybody remembers those, and your local bookstores as well.
Brick and mortar bookstore. What's that?
Yeah, it's a thing still.
Unbelievable. Fantastic. Brent, absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for being on the Alpha Human podcast. Wish you tremendous success. I love reading your stuff, and already looking forward to the next book. So
my daughter wants me to do a kid's version of Embrace the Suck, which
that's actually a great idea.
Yeah, I've had a few people say that.
Great idea. Great idea. Well, God bless, man, and thank you for your service.
God bless you. Appreciate you, man, and keep in touch. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Take care.